when you're in a theater, you give it the sanctity, that one does the cosmos. And I think that sort of letting yourself go and be small in comparison to something that has been built to be large and sensory is how a lot of the most beautiful films are meant to be seen. Give it some awe.
This is the Boxoffice Podcast. I'm Daniel Loria, the editorial director of Box Office Pro, the pulse of theatrical exhibition. And in this week's episode, we are going to be speaking with RaMell Ross, the director of Amazon MGM's Nickel Boys, coming out in limited release this Friday and expanding over the coming weeks. In my opinion, one of the best movies of the year, and I'm really, really excited to share that conversation with you in the second half of this episode. But to kick things off, we're going to be going over news with my colleagues and co-hosts, Pahle and Chad Kennerk. Guys, welcome back. Another week of movie going, whether it's catching up with things at home or going out. I know, Rebecca, you stayed in this week.
Yeah, it was rainy and miserable and gross. During the week prior to that, the weekday, I think I caught the last screen that was still playing Smile 2 with my boyfriend. So we got that before it left theaters. And then, yeah, Daniel, you and I were at the Motion Picture Party Club a week ago today, as people are listening to this on Thursday. That's always a good time. But yeah, other than that, I need to do better with catching up on movies that have kind of come out this year versus catching up on movies I have already seen from the 30s.
So there's nothing wrong with catching up with the 1930s. We just did a whole episode on that in last week's podcast.
I got to have a top 10 this year, though. I'm not going to have a top 10 unless I bump it forward a decade or
a decade or two. Oh, we're taping that in the coming weeks, Rebecca. You still got some time. Let us know what you need, and we'll find some screenings for you. Chad, you've been catching up with movies coming out in the last year. So what was in your latest selection of movies?
I'm really excited to talk about A Complete Unknown. The embargo has lifted for that, so we can now share our thoughts on that film. And I thought that it achieved kind of what any good biopic does, which is give insight into the human being and the man behind the music without feeling like a big laundry list of facts.
Yeah, it's not a Wikipedia entry at all.
No,
it's a very good musical biopic in a genre that can be a little bit tired sometimes. I didn't feel that way at all about this. I love this movie. I think it's one of the most entertaining movies of the year so far.
Yeah, me too.
Here's what I guess I have two questions on it. One, does this have anything for someone who I don't give crap about Bob Dylan? I know that's heretical to say, but I don't. And just the musical biopic, like, am I just going to be flashing back to Walk Hard through the whole time? Because if it fits all those beats, I'm just going to be thinking of Walk Hard. Like, does it do something interesting stylistically, or?
I think it's from James Mangold, who directed Walk the Line, which ended up creating the prototype for everything that followed it, including the great musical biopic spoof Walk Hard. I think it's really hard to watch anything within that mold and not find a little bit of Walk Hard in there, just because it's such a good satire.
Yeah, it's not against that movie. It's just that Walk Hard is so damn good.
That's how good Walk Hard is. Also, I don't know if you ever saw the other musical biopic movie that came out some years later, Pop Star, Never Stop Popping.
Never Stop Stopping.
Never Stop Stopping is the subtitle. Love that. That's another great musical biopic spoof. So listen, those movies I think are great. They're great at satirizing those elements. I think that's one of the reasons why it's so hard for me to get into this form. But going back to James Mangold, who I think already delivered with Walk the Line, and going into an artist that, like Chad, I liked, I wouldn't say I loved. Right? There's a whole cult around Bob Dylan. I wasn't part of the cult. I thought his music was good. I thought it was interesting. I was curious to learn more. And the way this movie is told, it's a 5-year slice of his career, really, from his emergence in the folk scene until his controversial decision to go electric. And making that decision, I thought, made it an extremely interesting film. And like I said, it was extremely entertaining. If you're not into Dylan's music, that's fine, because there's a lot of sampling of other music during that era. I'd say if you're not into the folk era, not for you, because there's a lot of different characters from that era coming in, and you hear some songs from that.
I'm good with other people. Not Bob Dylan necessarily.
Joan Baez is the find for me. I wasn't really aware of her music. She plays a very strong supporting role in this movie, and her music was a complete revelation to me. And I'm listening to a lot of Dylan and a lot of Baez now. Yeah, if you're not a fan of Dylan, I'm not sure you're going to have a good time, because it is a good 65% his songs and his music. But the other 35%, I think, if you're not a huge fan, if you're more, let's say, neutral like Chad and I were, it's fine. If you dislike Dylan, you're going to dislike the movie. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, that's like I'm going to stick with Nosferatu. Though I am curious to know, inside Llewyn Davis, the real life person that was based on, was also a big part of that scene. And I wonder if he has a little cameo of Oscar Isaac in the background coming by.
When they were filming the first Dune, I think Timothée Chalamet was working on Bob Dylan, and he told Oscar Isaac about this, and Oscar Isaac said this was a terrible idea. and then he heard him sing and play the guitar, and he was like, okay. And I think that's really part of this film, is the performances are great, and starting with Timothée Chalamet playing and singing all of Dylan's songs.
It was great. It was a great
It looks like Michael Chernis plays real life Llewyn Davis, Dave Van Ronk. So there's a little Cobra connection there of a sort.
Yeah, definitely.
No, I think definitely one of those movies that is going to be a crowd pleaser when we go to that late December cycle. I hope it finds an audience. Timothée Chalamet working over the weekend. I don't know if you guys caught his appearance on ESPN's College Game Day with expert analysis of the extremely niche Mid-American Conference Championship game, with really specific insight as to what Miami of Ohio would do against Ohio. Again, very small college programs. Either Timothée Chalamet is a college football savant, or the intern that puts together Obama's top 10 movies lists is feeding him like college football information, because I don't think that's him at all. Like the Obama top 10 list, there's an intern somewhere that just fed him some notes, and they were very good notes.
I don't know. Maybe he just is hyper fixated on this one particular. I don't know if it's. Honestly, I'm just happy Mets got Juan Soto, so that's my big sports.
That's a sports update.
That's my sports
you got
update
one over
of
the
the
Yankees.
week.
No one's gonna complain. Getting one over the Yankees.
Really.
And then the last bit of basically general culture trivia that I saw this week. You guys have to catch this if you haven't seen it. Paul Mezcal hosting Saturday Night Live, and I can't believe I said that sentence out loud, because he's a fairly serious actor. He's just entering these like blockbuster movies with Gladiator 2. He did a wonderful spoof, a musical spoof of Gladiator 2, which you can find online on YouTube, I'm sure. Really funny, and it's great to see again how the Barbenheimer phenomenon was able to permeate outside of the auditorium into the general culture. And now something like a Gladiator 2 musical riff is, again, keeping these movies in the minds of people outside of theaters. It's great to see. And now on to the exhibition news part of the segment. We have news from CinemaCon, which is now taking place on March 31st to April 3rd of 2025 down in Las Vegas, Nevada. The Marquee Award this year will be Cinemark CEO Sean Gamble. This is the big award that NATO confers to a member of the exhibition community each year. And it's going to be great to see our colleague Sean Gamble up on stage to receive that honor this year. In other NATO news, Rebecca, we've got major transition here on how the Cinema Foundation's Cinema Days are going to be looking like in 2025.
Yeah, they've definitely kind of reworked their National Cinema Day that had, I think, some really great success these last 2 years. For those listening who are maybe unfamiliar, it was just one day in the I think slower part of the calendar where all tickets to all movies would be $3. So there's not necessarily, a big blockbuster movie coming out that weekend, but it's a great time for families to go in and to catch up and just to kind of reintroduce people to the movies and to the movie theater experience if they had not been to the cinema in a while. I think it's fair to say that after 2021, since the years we've had since then, a lot more people have been to the cinemas in the last 2 years. So it's interesting to see that National Cinema Day is being transitioned over to At the Movies, a campaign that is less a one day, hey, let's get people out to the cinemas situation than something something that goes on throughout the year that has different focuses. I think it's touching base with different segments of the audience at different times of the year. So Q1 25, National Popcorn Day, January 19th. I always love a free popcorn, so I'll be there. Q2 2025. This is actually the one that I'm most interested in. Sneak Peek Saturday, an exclusive look at upcoming summer and holiday films with behind-the-scenes cinematic content and sneak peeks. This comes right after CinemaCon, so all the clips and the trailers and all the exciting bits and bobs that we get to see from Caesar's Palace, moviegoers are actually going to get to see that.
I'm
really
curious as to how that's going to work out.
Like,
because
how
I think
much is it?
That's really interesting because some of these presentations are 2 hours long, right? So I'm sure you're going to get a snippet of it, but you're already talking about a pretty long pre-show. I think that's fair to say, between the commercials and the trailers. Audiences are waiting 20 minutes after the official start of the showtime to get to see anything. How much are you going to show in these
that's what it depends on what the content is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be, you can't put something that you put on YouTube the week previous. It has to be something, because there are all these, I'm thinking like the first Wolfman trailer they saw at CinemaCon, and the movie's not even out yet. The trailer didn't come out for months after CinemaCon. I think it's a good move to get people planning ahead, get the seeds planted in their heads to see some of these movies that are further out on the calendar. Again, depending on what the sort of content the studios provide. So there are 2 more components to this At the Movies campaign from NATO and the Cinema Foundation. Q3 2025 is Date Night at the Movies, and Q4 Family Day at the Movies. Those are August 15th and November 9th. I think we don't really know a ton of details on those in the back half of 2025, but it's interesting to see that transitioned from a reintroduction to the movies to kind of a honing in on the different ways that the theater experience can be utilized. Because, last National Cinema Day, we've definitely seen that it did huge in bringing families in to movies that they'd already seen, to movies that they maybe hadn't had a chance to see. So to have like a whole day just dedicated to and devoted to Family Day, November 9th. Obviously, it's almost a year in the future here, but it sounds like there's a lot of room in there for cinemas to do something really interesting to engage with their guests, to bring in new guests, to engage with their communities, and hopefully, to have the product from studios to back them up on that, because obviously the content is the most important thing.
Yeah, I think that's the big difference, obviously, from where we are now than where we were when the original National Cinema Day was introduced, is that we have a more packed schedule. We don't have the gaps in the calendar that we had in prior years. There could have been a conversation to have maybe in the first semester of 2024. I think that's probably the last time when there were real gaps in the calendar. But from here on out, 2026, I see very little space to have a discount day at the movies.
Thank God we're out of that period where there were those really, really quiet weekends where nothing much was coming out. So I'm happy about that. I'm happy that we're taking a more kind of gradual throughout the year approach, a consistent approach to reminding people of why they love to go to the cinemas.
I think it's really smart that we have kind of a slate of days where cinemas can really prepare in advance for what that's going to look like for them.
It's like date night, family day. There's so much you can do with that.
Yeah.
We're all 3 programming stuff in our head now, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
Basically, what would I do?
Yeah.
I agree with you guys. I think it's a great idea, and I'm excited to learn more about this from NATO in the coming weeks. But now let's move over to new theater openings, because Alamo Drafthouse has announced a couple of new openings in the San Francisco Bay Area. Chad, what's the latest on that?
Yeah, Alamo Drafthouse continuing to expand with 2 new San Francisco Bay theaters, the Alamo Drafthouse Mountain View and the Alamo Drafthouse Westfield Valley Fair. They are taking over spaces from Showplace Icon, and they're expected to open in summer of 2025.
Okay,
All right.
interesting. It's been great to see. I know for these newly opened theaters, I'm sure there were plans in place before Alamo was acquired by Sony, but it's still nice to see, any doubts that people might have had about the chain losing its essence seem to be unfounded. They're doing great, doing strong.
Yeah, it's great to see a chain coming in and picking up vacant locations from another exhibitor. That's what we always want, right? We lose one operator, seeing another one that has experience in the business come in, take over, and install a new concept.
Yeah, they've actually been there for 10 years. In 2025, they'll be celebrating their 10th anniversary. So to have 2 more locations there, it's a great way to celebrate that.
Yeah, I certainly think it's great news for both Alamo and local audiences to have those additional locations that are available to them. Now, moving on to some interesting marketing ploys that we've seen. I didn't believe this when Rebecca told me. I told her, absolutely not. There's no way. Earlier this morning, before we record, Rebecca texts Chad and I and says, hey, Focus Features is selling a $20,000 life-size replica of the Nosferatu sarcophagus. And they're putting some on like specific locations around the country, and AMC Lincoln Square has one. I didn't believe you for a second. There's no way. I was wrong. They totally have a $20,000 life-size replica of the sarcophagus in their lobby.
I'm sure that you're immediately going like, how can we heist this? I want this thing. But I don't know. Maybe they fill it with like just bags upon bags of empty popcorn kernels to weight it down even more so no one can get it.
Well, apparently this thing is 575 pounds. The bed
How do you get it up there?
The bed you can buy is 250. So these ones that are in the actual lobbies are like full-on
Twice
replicas.
as heavy.
Yeah.
Twice as heavy. That makes no sense.
I don't know if they're production made or if they specifically made them for promotion.
Well, what happens afterwards? Do you give them out to staff? Does your cinema staff, like, do GMs get to decide, hey, your quarterly bonus is going to be a sarcophagus?
Looking at this thing, I'd take it. I don't have room for it. If I bought a $20,000 sarcophagus as a bed,
I think you can hose in that thing with cold water, some ice. That's like a cold plunge right there. That's what I'd use a sarcophagus for.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. I just keep snacks in it.
And it's funny because at the Motion Picture Club, Rebecca and I ran into some colleagues from A24 from the distribution team. So big shout out to John O'Rourke and Frank Martinez who listened to our podcast. And we were giving them so much grief for selling $40 candles on their website.
Wait, $40?
A $20,000 Focus Features Universal Studio sarcophagus. A little bit more, unrealistic budget-wise than a $40 candle. I take it back, guys.
A $48 candle.
Oh, they've gone up. That's your tariff boost right there.
I don't know if Focus anyone like expects. It's creative. I like it.
I mean, is delivery and installation included in the purchase price?
Yeah, how does that work?
Do they give you the IKEA Allen wrench?
Yeah, someone's putting that together. I'm not putting in a 20 grand sarcophagus together in my house. And what we should see out of solidarity
you'd have to
is
bury
at least some like cross studio promotion. Throw in a $75 A24 hoodie with a sarcophagus. Why not? You're already spending that much money. I think it'd be nice. We have to find, if anybody buys any of these things, we have to find them and interview them. We have to get that going.
Yeah, we have to know. If anyone knows anyone listening to this who has large disposable income and actually gets this bed, we desperately need to talk to you.
I mean, which goth teenager has that much spending money? Seriously, I don't know who in the world would buy this, but I hope there's someone, at least someone out there that is willing to come to our podcast and say, I purchased the $20,000 Focus Feature sarcophagus of the second Nosferatu remake, and we will have you on the podcast. We'll be happy to. That pretty much sums up our conversation here for the exhibition side of the episode. And now coming up next is the filmmaker RaMell Ross, the director of Nickel Boys, coming out this weekend from Amazon MGM. That is going to be expanding out to more cities in the coming weeks. And before we get started, guys, let me tell you something about this movie. For me, at this point, it is my favorite movie of the year, an extremely powerful work. And in my conversation with RaMell, we go a lot into a big choice he made with the film formally. That is shooting the entire thing in the first-person perspective of his two protagonists. Now, we get lost in that. I want to make sure I mentioned this in case it's not in the beginning of the recording, but it is a choice that is going to drive away a lot of viewers in the first 15 to 20 minutes. So anyone thinking about giving this movie a shot, let me tell you, have faith in that decision and it'll pay off. Go into it giving it the room to work on the way and the terms that the movie wants to work, and you will be handsomely rewarded. Because if you come in with your own expectations of how a film should work formally, visually, you're going to have a bumpy time. If you come at it with an open mind, I think you're in for a great, great treat in movie going. And now, with any further ado, here is my interview with Nickel Boys director RaMell Ross. RaMell, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to chat.
No, the pleasure is definitely mine. Yeah, I'm happy to chat about Nickel Boys anytime, any place, anywhere.
Good. I got to tell you, a number of years ago, on an award season screener, I got to catch your documentary, Hale County this evening, with my wife. And we were both blown away by it. I mean, I was completely floored. One of probably the best documentaries I've seen in the last decade. And I looked you up. I wasn't acquainted with your work before. And I made a note in the back of my head, I'm going to run into this guy at Doc NYC or at Full Frame at one of the documentary film festivals. And when I do, I really want to, give him his flowers for this, congratulate him on this. And I had not thought too much of it. And when I saw Nickel Boys show up on the screenings side of things, I didn't connect your name with the film. I saw the film, I connected the name, and I was both surprised and not surprised because your DNA is all over this thing, and I couldn't be happier about it. So I want to start with that. How do you go from a lyrical documentary to adapting probably one of the most celebrated novels in an awards contender as your feature debut? What was that journey like?
Well, you started it as I sort of enter into the process of translation, which is just through Hale County this evening, and through the lyrical and the poetic. And I think trying to maintain genuine sense of whatever my sensibility is, and just not trying to do things that one would assume one would do when they're making a fiction film or doing an adaptation. And I'm kind of saying this spontaneously because I don't think I've answered this question in this way, but I feel like when one makes a film, one gets advice from people and they, figure out how films have been made and they go to school for it, and they maybe impose a methodology for fear of walking in the dark and not knowing exactly where to plant the first street lamp in this darkness. But I think having Hale County this evening was something I could rely on in that sense. It's just an emergence from that process.
I want to interweave that process of how that documentary informs this work, because I think they exist, at least to me as a viewer, in a very cohesive sense, spiritually, both stories, and not only through the filmmaking, but also through the way you shoot these experiences. They're both first-person experiences in their own regard, I felt.
Exactly, yeah.
There's a difficulty adapting a novel like Nickel Boys. When I told my wife, who'd read the book, I hadn't read it, that I was going to go see a film adaptation of it, she kind of gave me this puzzled look saying, how are they going to make a movie about Nickel Boys? That's going to be, she said, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but I'm interested to see how they figure it out. And I think that challenge is something that you address formally. Now, filmmakers can address these challenges through performance, through music, through aesthetics. That's fine. And you do that here too. But principally, you're working with film grammar to address an adaptation challenge. That's hugely ambitious, I think very effective, but also very risky, especially as you come in to a celebrated novel. It's not an obscure novel that you rescued from a corner. This is a very celebrated recent novel. Did you feel a pressure with that, or how did you come to this approach that you took for this film, shooting it in that first-person perspective?
Yeah, it's an interesting prompt or an interesting question. I think in that the language of bold and the language of, pressure and stressful, it's kind of, I don't want to say that it's sort of imposed. I recognize those things to be there, but they're not at the forefront, they just don't exist in the same way. I think that maybe they exist in hindsight after the project is done. When you're working with materials and the materials kind of produce the form of the film or the project that you're working on, that sincerity between idea, concept, and material in form is relatively righteous. It's almost self-emergent that it is what it is. It's not something where I felt like I was bringing, I think if I took adaptation in the way in which adaptation is, I think, traditionally addressed, which is more illustrative, I think that would have been in the forefront because I'd constantly be comparing what we were doing to the source material. But that wasn't the case. We went back to the Dozier School documents. We went back to the Dozier School Boys, and then we went to Boys of the Dark, which was one of Coulson's source materials. And then we went to Nickel Boys. And so the combination of materials produces this approach.
And I think it's an important distinction to make. And correct me if you disagree with my interpretation of it, because I didn't think it was a stylistic choice. Again, me not knowing how the book evolves, how the story evolves, you recognize quite quickly early on that it's a stylistic choice. It's not until after I see the film in the third act that I realize it's not really a choice, it's an approach. It's a structure by the entire house is built on this. A choice is something you do for flair that you can stick to, that you can abandon. This works in benefit to the story.
I love that you're focusing in on that because it's frustrating to read people's reviews and or have people talk about it and they use the word gimmick or they use the style of this film is this. As you're mentioning, it is part and parcel with the imagination of the entire world. And so it does not only I think the people who haven't seen the film to read that, it does them an injustice and not letting them meet the film in a way that is a little bit more unencumbered, but it also is just a lack of care or a lack of reading and what's actually happening, I think. But it's lazy language and everyone uses lazy language,
And it's interesting to me sometimes where I feel a lot of the folks that I speak to, that I'm with, will be okay when let's say literature pushes them a little bit, right? Or asks them to rethink their way of engaging with different approaches. It seems for film, it's a little bit of a risk. And I do want to ask a little bit about that, how you're coming in, your feature debut of a beloved novel, and you're coming in with a very bold decision, with a very bold approach. How was that presenting it in a production basis? How did you get attached to the project with this specific vision? And I don't want to say convince, but how did you share that? How did you get everyone on your side to execute this the way you did?
Well, I think I am fortunate to have sort of a proof of concept already in Hale County. I could point to 3 or 4 scenes in the film that were quite literally how the film would be shot. And I think with the way that someone looks at Hale County and they're like, whoa, that's an interesting film. And then I can sort of talk to them about the problem of expressing what that would be, and then the sort of result of its constituent pieces coming together in some sort of gestalt. People can kind of understand that when you're working with genuinely poetic form that seems to be building itself in the process of you encountering it, there is something that is unable to be articulated. And so they kind of let go of the expectations for what they're reading to be one-to-one with what they imagine. I'm lucky in that Coulson's book is about 2 American Black boys, and I'm an American Black boy. And, the way that I think about images specifically from my point of view kind of just vibes, fundamentally with both of the characters. And so I think I could offer images and an attention to detail to how they would be executed and iterated for people that just make sense. And it all aligns even politically. So there's a lot of coincidences, I think, that allowed it to be what it is.
How much was Colson Whitehead involved in the making of this film? Because sometimes having the author close to the work sometimes helped, sometimes hurt. What was your mindset as you entered this project?
I mean, I imagine having the author close to the adaptation would only hurt. Almost in all cases, if the filmmaker is attempting to sort of utilize every element of film, which I think means not paying attention to all of the details that language and literature can offer, it has to be necessarily not, to me, like not sort of serve the narrative, but be some other species of it, which is a strange thing. I think that the pressure for me was more with the idea of not having the film feel satisfactory for those who trusted me to adapt it, and therefore, kind of cutting down opportunities for those in the future. Like people took a pretty big risk in giving, myself and Jocelyn and all of the other creatives the creative, I guess, leeway to explore a lot of these things. And so to not do it means that the next person won't have the opportunity, essentially. But then to do it well means there'll be more opportunities, like more risk will be taken. And so I feel like that was kind of the biggest. It's like, man, I just want to do satisfactory so that other people can also try, because most people don't.
Yeah, it's a big risk. I agree with you, but I can tell you, coming at it quote unquote blind, because I was familiar with your work. I was very impressed with your work, but I didn't connect the dots. Like I said in the screening, I wasn't familiar with the book other than its reputation. I absolutely love this movie, and I have to tell you, that's why I wanted to open with a big conversation about this structural decision, your approach rather than a stylistic choice.
Yeah.
In the way I view it in getting this out there, because I really have to say that it's an approach that I think benefits the narrative and enhances the film. When we talk about adaptation, it's something you brought up, right? Do you really want the author of a source material there through the adaptation? What is the benefit? And what I think I saw here is you were able to complement the source material. You're able to enhance it, not in the sense that you're improving it or elevating it, but you're adding to it. You're adding a dimension that isn't intrinsic to the original text. And ultimately, what I can tell you is I came out thinking about your filmmaking decisions in conjunction with the power of the narrative behind it. And
Interesting.
I have to congratulate you for that. So I do think you executed it perfectly.
Well, Daniel, I really appreciate that. I love that you had mentioned the people's openness to new writing structures and forms, as it relates to, literature. And I guess people's fundamental, maybe if it's just the awards crowd, but people's fundamental hesitation with stuff that is asking them to do anything other than sit back and have an emotional experience. In particular, with stories that have to do with trauma and history, there seems to be some sort of fixation with the audience's emotional connection to their stories as the end goal of the film, as opposed to a sort of experiential enlightenment of what it means to see during those times, or what it means to understand the larger historical context as it relates to, X, Y, or Z features of culture. It's confusing. And I think this is coming from reading a lot of the way that some people are responding. And I remember like somebody responded that this story shouldn't be served through a flourish of images or something. And I'm like, well, that's not what Nickel Boys is. And also, why not? Like, why, like, why does this story have to be told in the way in which you think it needs to be told? Also, the way in which you expect to have an emotional response. There's something really fascinating about the viewer's conditioned and programmed entitlement to means of connecting while also being entertained, or also feeling. I think we were lucky enough to be able to approach differently through this film, and maybe even bring that to conversation,
These lyrical moments in the film, you draw on memory, because it's a film rooted in first-person perspectives, right? Plural first-person perspectives. So, of course, you're going to have moments of memory that maybe is reliable as a moviegoer would hope. And there are dreamlike elements there. But we look at other filmmakers, let's say Luis Buñuel, who adapted, Belle de Jour, and brought in a lot of these sort of, surrealistic moments with like wild animals in a scene, these little lyrical flourishes through a film, and we don't challenge that ambition. But somehow, sometimes I feel as a viewer and frustrated when in the reception of a film here, we don't welcome those risks. And I'm really, really thankful that you were able to take those risks. And it doesn't seem like a risk at all once you see it. It's efficient, it's effective, it works with the story perfectly. And it's part of a filmmaking tradition that has existed for many years, but you don't see it in awards, quote unquote, award season cinema. And I don't mean to to pigeonhole your film that way, right? That it's an award season product, but or contextualize it in that sense. I came out of Nickel Boys, RaMell, thinking it's part of a bigger tradition of filmmaking that wants to let the viewer experience something and meet something on their own terms. And,
Exactly.
and again, was really happy. So I want to ask you a little bit about that decision of bringing in those moments of memory, those moments of fantasy sometimes, where dreamlike elements sort of seep in. Buñuel would often do this. I know I just mentioned him, but he'd often do this in a lot of his films, even in the ones that aren't directly surrealist. These moments, how did you decide to incorporate those flourishes through the film?
So the second that you think about first-person perspective, you think about, the sentient camera, you think about observational logic, the latter two, kind of built or like made up to address some of the ways in which the camera is working. You have to think about the relationship between our psychological realities, our inner realities, the external, quote unquote, objective reality, people's participation in the objective reality while having their own internal psychological experiential realities, in conjunction with yours. And, the more we know about the brain, the more we know, the less we know. And so it's one of those beautiful problems where it's like, the way that people exist in the world is simultaneously in fear of and in hope of the future while reliving their past, while postponing the present and mixing them all together. One of my favorite quotes of Chris Marker's from La Jetée is something like, nothing tells memory from ordinary moments. Only afterwards do they claim remembrance on account of their scars. Mm-hmm. And so thinking about something as complex as that, it's like there is the distinctions that we make between fantasy, fiction, nonfiction, like all of these are basic constructs which we need to shape in order to be social people. But if you're going to take POV seriously, you have to deal with the idea that people are realities.
It's interesting that you mention Chris Marker, because it's a filmmaker that also oscillated between documentary and narrative and would often bring in, let's say, archival footage or archival materials into his work and directly tackled issues of memory. How much of that is something that interests you as an artist?
I'd say deeply. Chris Marker, I think, is, for lack of better ways to express people who are incredibly influential and profoundly different from others, like one of the greatest. I think he's a writer, he's an essayist, he's a philosopher, he's a filmmaker. He's not interested in one thing, and therefore he's able to make film making the site of a wider range of human experience and ideas. And that's something I think I'm deeply interested in. Also, his work is just so moving and also thought out. He has like some sort of demigod position in my brain. So I'm going to stop talking about him before you believe that I'm starting some religion.
Yeah. No, it's an influence that you see in Latin American cinema, that you see in documentary, that you see in science fiction narrative. It's great to see all these strands that have kind of like grown out of these perspectives. And again, like we were talking about Nickel Boys, it's a formal approach to filmmaking challenges, a formal approach to adaptation that I think enhances a lot of these films that we talk about, including yours. This is a movie that I think is, especially with the aspect ratio you've chosen, especially through that first-person perspective, one that is enhanced so much by the theatrical experience. So for you, I wanted to ask, what does that theatrical experience mean to you as a filmmaker? What is it about that inspires you in the way you approach your films?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the scale. Right. We, to have someone sit down and experience, cinema as one would a mountain, or as one would the sunset, or some sort of large scale landscape in which they're kind of giving themselves. It's not part of the world that they're in. Like when you're watching something in your house, you have your dog, you have, the person who's getting home and closing their car door and then turning their car alarm off, like you're in the world with the theater, and there's like this weird equalizing that happens across sounds and across visuals. Who knows? There's probably a big plant casting a shadow on your screen. But when you're in a theater, you give it the sanctity, that one does the cosmos. And I think that sort of letting yourself go and be small in comparison to something that has been built to be large and sensory is how a lot of the most beautiful films are meant to be seen. Give it some awe.
In terms of a moviegoer yourself, is there a movie theater from either your childhood or your growing up, teenager, young adult, that you think of as your movie theater, the one that you associate with going to the movies?
There was a cinema in East Providence that closed, and it was like I would go there in grad school, and it was $3, and I would watch The Rider there, and it's like all the movies that from AMC or something go to this small theater. No one's in there. The speakers are on the floor, big screen, and it's kind of where you go and get to be alone in public, maybe with a couple others, and have that magical discovery process. So maybe that's it. I've moved around so much that I haven't been able to really situate myself in relationship to a theater, but that's the one that kind of comes to mind when you mention.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And congratulations again. Now you've made 2 great movies. When I see you in person in one of these events,
it's a pleasure talking to you, and thanks for your thoughts on the film. And I appreciate your perspective on its relationship to literature and it being just like a needed mode of maybe even cinematic attention. I appreciate it.
And that was Nickel Boys director RaMell Ross joining us here at the Boxoffice Podcast. Nickel Boys is being released starting this weekend in New York and expanding to more cities starting in the coming weeks. I'm sure it will be a big part of the awards conversation in the months to come. On behalf of everyone here at the Boxoffice Podcast and our producing partners, Record Edit Podcast, thank you again for listening, and we will be again with you next week.